I am Lady Rain, and this is the Reader's Nook. We're on section 3, which is the last section, chapter 6, which means we're almost done. And we're starting with the first section. So, you ready, guard? This is called Inside the Ship. So it looks like we're going inside now. Gardner was sitting on the front porch, looking out at Route 9. The voice came from behind him, and it was easy, too easy, for him not to flash on 100 sleazy prison movies, where the warden arrives to escort the condemned man along the last mile. They really walk a mile. Such scenes always beginning, of course, with the warden growling, "Are you ready, Rocky? Ready for this? You gotta be kidding." He got up, turned around, saw the equipment in Bobby's arms, then the little smile on Bobby's face. This was something knowing. There was something knowing in that smile that he didn't like. "See something funny?" he asked. "Heard it. Heard you, guard." "You were thinking about old prison movies," Bobby said. And then he thought, "Ready for this? You gotta be kidding me. I caught all of that one, and that's very rare, unless you're deliberately sending. That's why I'm smiling. You were peeking, yes. And it's getting easier to do," Bobby said, still smiling. From behind his decaying mental shield, Gardner thought, "I have a gun now, Bobby. It's under my bed. I got it in the First Redeemed Church of the Tommyknockers. It was dangerous, but it would be more dangerous not to know just how deep Bobby's ability to peek now went." Bobby's smile faltered a little. "What was that one?" she asked. "You tell me," he said. And when her smile began to change to a look of narrow suspicion, he added easily, "Come on, Bobby. I was just pulling your string a little. I was just wondering what you got there." Bobby brought the equipment over. There were 2 rubber snorkel mouthpieces attached to the tanks. 2 tanks and handmade regulators. "We wear these," she said, "when we go inside." Inside? Just the word lit a hot spark in his belly, and triggered all sorts of conflicting emotions. Awe, terror, anticipation, curiosity, tension. Part of him felt like a superstitious native preparing to walk on taboo ground. The rest felt like a kid on Christmas morning. "The air inside is different then," Gardner said. "Not so different." Bobby put her makeup on indifferently this morning, perhaps having decided there was no longer need to hide the accelerating physical changes from Gardner. Guard realized he could see Bobby's tongue moving inside her head as she spoke. Only it didn't look precisely like a tongue anymore, and the pupils of Bobby's eyes looked bigger, but somehow uneven and wavering, as if they were peering up at him from underwater. Water with a slight greenish tinge. He felt his stomach turn over. "Not so different," she said, "just rotten." "Rotten? The ship's been sealed for over 25,000 centuries. What is that, like 2.5 million years? Bobby said patiently. "Totally sealed. We'd be killed by the outrush of bad air as soon as we open the hatch. So, we wear these." "What's in them?" "Nothing but good old haven air. The tanks are small, 40, maybe 50 minutes of air. You clip it on your belt like this, see?" "Yes." Bobby offered him one of the rigs. Gardner attached the tank to his belt. He had to raise his t-shirt to do it, and he was very glad he'd decided to leave the 45 under the bed now. "Start using the canned air just before I open it up," Bobby said. "Almost forgot. Here. Just in case you forget." She handed Gardner a pair of nose plugs. Gardner stuffed them into his jeans pocket. "Well," Bobby said briskly, "are you ready then?" "We're really going in there?" "We really are," Bobby said almost tenderly. Gardner laughed shakily. His hands and feet were cold. "I'm pretty fucking excited," he said. Bobby smiled. "I am too. Also, I'm scared." In that same tender voice, Bobby said, "No need to be, guard. Everything will be all right." Something in that tone made Gardner feel more scared than ever, too. They took the Tomcat and cruised silently through the dead woods. The only sound, the minute hum of batteries. Neither of them talked. Bobby parked the Tomcat by the lean-to. And it's like basically it's got 4, like, pillars, stakes, whatever, and it's like, basically it's a shed with a slanted roof and only a back. There's no sides or front, so it's a lean-to. And they stood for a moment looking at the silver dish rising out of the trench. The morning sun shone on it in a pure, widening wedge of light. Inside, Gardner thought again. Are you ready? Bobbi asked again. Come on, Rocky. Just one big jolt. You'll never feel a thing. Yeah, fine, Gardner said. His voice was a trifle hoarse. Bobbi was looking at him inscrutably with her changing eyes, those floating, widening pupils. Gardner seemed to feel mental fingers fluttering over his thoughts, trying to pull them open. Going in there could kill you, you know, Bobbi said at last. Not the air. We've got that licked, she smiled. It's funny, you know. 5 minutes on one of those mouthpieces would knock someone from the outside unconscious, and half an hour of it would kill him. But it'll keep us alive. Does that tickle you, Guard? Yes, Guard said, looking at the ship and wondering the things he always wondered. Where did you come from? And how long did you have cruise the night to get here? It tickles me. I think you'll be okay. But you know, Bobbi shrugged, your head, that steel plate, interacts somehow with the... I know the risk, as long as you do. Bobbi turned and walked toward the trench. Gardner stood where he was for a moment, watching her go. I know the risk from the plate. What I'm less clear on is the risk from you, Bobbi. Is the haven air I'm going to get when I have to use that mask something like raid? But it didn't matter, did it? He had thrown the dice, and nothing was going to keep him from seeing inside the ship, if he could. Not David Brown, not the whole world. Bobbi reached the trench. She turned and looked back. Her made-up face a dull mask in the morning light, angling through the old pines and spruces which surrounded this place. Coming? Yeah, Gardner said, and walked over to the ship. 3. Getting down proved to be unexpectedly tricky. Ironically, getting up was the easy part. The button at the bottom was right there. In fact, no more than the 0 on the remote telephone handset. On the top, the button was a conventional electric switch, set on one of the posts which surrounded the lean-to. That's what they're called, posts. This was 50 feet from the edge of the trench. So half a football field. For the first time, Gardner realized how all those car recalls could happen. Until now, neither of them had bothered with the fact that their arms were somewhat less than 50 feet long. They had been used to using the sling to go up and down for a long time now. Long enough, take it for granted. Standing at the edge of the trench, they realized that they had never both gone down together. What both also realized, but neither said, was that they could have gone down one at a time, with someone to run the buttons at the bottom. All would have been well. Neither said it because it was understood between them that this time, and only this time, they must go down together, perfectly together, both with one foot in the single stirrup, arms around each other's waists, like lovers in a descending swing. It was stupid, just stupid enough to be the only right way. They looked at each other without saying a word, but 2 thoughts flew and crossed in the air. Here we are, a couple of college graduates. Bobbi, where'd I leave my left-handed monkey wrench? Bobbi's strange new mouth quivered. She turned around and snorted. Guard felt a moment of old warmth touch his heart then. It was the last time he really ever saw the old and unimproved Bobbi Anderson. Well, can you rig a portable unit to run the sling? I can, but it's not worth taking the time. I've got another idea. Her eyes touched Gardner's face for a moment, thoughtful and calculating. It was a look Gardner could not quite interpret. Then Bobbi walked away to the lean-to. Gardner followed her part way, saw Bobbi swing open a large green metal box that had been mounted on a pole. She pawed through the tools and general junk inside, and then came back with a transistor radio. It was smaller than the ones his helpers had turned into new and improved satchel charges while Bobbi was recuperating. Guard had never seen this particular radio before. Very small. One of them brought it out last night, he thought. Bobbi pulled up its stubby antenna, inserted itchy nose, inserted a jack into its plastic case, and the plug in her ear. Gardner was instantly reminded of Freeman Moss, moving the pumping equipment like an elephant trainer, moving the big guys around the center ring. This won't take long. Bobbi pointed the antenna back toward the farm. Gardner seemed to hear a heavy, powerful hum. Not on the air, but inside the air somehow. For just a moment, his mind muttered with music, and there was a headachy pain in the middle of his forehead, as if he had drunk too much cold water too fast. Now what? We wait, Bobbi said, and repeated, it won't take long. Her speculative gaze passed over Gardner's face again, and this time Gardner thought he understood that look. It's something she wants me to see, and this chance came up to show me. He sat down near the trench and discovered a very old pack of cigarettes in his breast pocket. 2 were left. One was broken, and the other bent but whole. He lit it and smoked reflectively, not really sorry about this delay. It gave him a chance to go over his plan again. Of course, if he dropped dead as soon as he went through that round hatch, it would be something of a crimp in those plans. Ah, here we go, Bobbi said, getting up. Guard also got up. He looked around and at first saw nothing. Over there, Guard, the path. Bobbi spoke with the pride of a kid showing off her first soapbox racer. Gardner finally saw it and began to laugh. He didn't really want to laugh, but he couldn't help it. He kept thinking he was getting used to the brave new world of Haven's jury-rigged super science, and then some old new combination would tumble him right back down the rabbit hole, like now. Bobbi was smiling, but faintly, vaguely, as if Gardner's laugh meant nothing one way or the other. It does look a little strange, but it will do the trick. Take my word for it. It was the Electrolux he had seen in the shed. It was not running on the ground, but just above it, its little white wheels turning. Its shadow ran placidly off to one side, like a Dachshund on a leash. From the back, where the vacuum hose attachments would have gone in a sane world, 2 filament-thin wires protruded in a V shape. Its antenna, Gardner thought. Now it landed, if you could call a touchdown from 3 inches a landing, and treadled over the beaten earth of the excavation area to the lean-to, leaving narrow tracks behind it. It stopped below the switch box, which controlled the sling. Watch this, Bobbi said in that same pleased, showing off my soapbox racer voice. There was a click, a hum. Now a thin, black rope began to rise out of the vacuum cleaner's side, like a rope rising out of a wicker basket in the Indian rope trick. Only it wasn't a rope. Gardner saw it was a length of coaxial cable. It rose in the air, up, up, up. It touched the side of the switch box and slid around to the front. Gardner felt a crawl of revulsion. It was like watching something like a bat, a blind thing which had some sort of radar, a blind thing that could seek. The end of the cable found the buttons, the black one which started the sling going down and up, the red one which stopped it, and the end of the cable touched the black one, suddenly went rigid. The black button popped neatly in. The motor behind the lean-to started up, and the sling started to slip into the trench. The tension went out of the cable. It slipped down to the red stop button, stiffened, and pushed it. When the motor had died, leaning over, Gardner could see the sling dangling against the side of the cut about 12 feet down. The cable rose and pushed the black button again. The motor started once more. The sling came back up. When it reached the top of the trench, the motor died automatically. Bobbi turned to him. She was smiling, but her eyes were watchful. There, she said. Works fine. It's incredible, Gardner said. His eyes had moved steadily back and forth between Bobbi and the Electrolux as the cable ran the buttons. Bobbi had not been gesturing with the radio as Freeman Moss had with his walkie-talkie, but Gardner had seen the little frown of concentration in the way her eyes had dropped just an instant before the coaxial cable slipped down from the black button to the red one. Looks like a mechanical Datsun. Something out of one of those terminally cute Kelly Freas SF paintings. That's what it looks like. But it's not a robot. Not really. It has no brain. Bobbi's its brain. She wants me to know it. And there had been a lot of those customized appliances in the shed, lined up against the wall. The one his mind kept trying to fix on was the washing machine, with the boomerang antenna mounted on it, the shed. That raised a hell of an interesting question. Bard opened his mouth to ask it, then closed it again, trying at the same time to thicken the shield over his thoughts as much as he could. He felt like a man who has nearly strolled over the lip of a chasm 1,000 feet deep while looking at a pretty sunset. No one back home, at least that I know of, and the shed's padlocked on the outside. So just how did Fido, the vacuum cleaner, get out? He had really been only an instant from asking that question when he realized Bobbi hadn't mentioned where the Electrolux had come from. Guard could suddenly smell his own sweat, sour and evil. He looked at Bobbi and saw Bobbi looking at him with a small, irritated smile that meant she knew Gardner was thinking, but not what. Where did the thing come from, anyway? Gardner asked. Oh, it was around. Bobbi waved her hand vaguely. The important thing is that it works. So much for the unexpected delay. Want to get going? Fine. I just hope that thing's batteries don't go flat while we're down there. I'm its battery, she said. As long as I'm all right. You'll get up again. Guard, okay? Your insurance policy. Yes, I think I get it. Okay, he said. They went to the trench. Bobbi rode the sling down first, while the cable rising from the side of the Electrolux ran the buttons. The sling came back up, and Gardner stepped into it, holding the rope as it began to go down again. He took a final look at the battered old Electrolux and thought again. How the hell did it get out? Then he was sliding down the dimness of the trench, and the dank mineral smell of wet rocks, the smooth surface of the ship rising up, and on his left, like the side of a skyscraper without windows. Oh, it was rising up and up on his left. 4. Gardner stepped off the sling. He and Bobbi stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the circular groove of the hatch, which had the shape of a large porthole. Gardner found it almost impossible to take his eyes from the symbol etched upon it. He found himself remembering something from his earliest childhood. There had been an outbreak of diphtheria in the Portland suburb where he'd been raised. 2 kids had died, and the public health office had imposed a quarantine. He remembered walking to the library, his hand safely caught up in his mother's, passing houses where signs had been stapled to the front doors. Same word in heavy black letters heading each. He asked her what it meant, and she said it meant that there was sickness in the house. It was a good word, she said, because it warned people not to go in. If they did, she said, they might catch the disease and spread it. Are you ready? Bobbi asked, breaking in on his thoughts. What does that mean? He pointed to the symbol on the hatch. I'm reading. Vermishave. Bobbi said and smiling. Are you? No, but I guess I'm close as I'll ever get. He looked at the tank clipped to his belt and wondered again if he was going to draw some poison that would explode his lungs at the first breath. He didn't think so. This was supposed to be his reward. One visit inside the holy temple before he was erased, once and for all, from the equation. All right, Bobbi said. I'm going to open it. You're going to think it open? Gardner said, looking at the plug in Bobbi's ear. Yes, Bobbi replied dismissively, as if to say, what else? It's going to iris open. There'll be an explosive rush of bad air. And when I say bad, I mean really bad. How are your hands? What do you mean? Cuts. Nothing that isn't scabbed over. He held his hands out like a little boy, submitting to his mother's pre-dinner inspection. Okay. Bobbi took a pair of cotton wire gloves from her back pocket and drew them on. The guard's inquiring look, she said. Hangnails on 2 fingers. It might not be enough, but might. When you see the hatch start to iris open, guard, close your eyes. Breathe from the tank. If you whiff on what comes out of the ship, it's going to kill you as quick as a Drano cocktail. I, Gardner said, am convinced. He slipped the snorkel mouthpiece into his mouth and used the nose plugs. Bobbi did the same. Gardner could feel his pulse in his temples, moving very fast, like someone tapping rapidly on a muffled drum with one finger. This is it. This is finally it. Ready? Bobbi asked one last time, muffled by the mouthpiece. It came out sounding like Elmer Fudd. Ready? Gardner nodded. Remember. Gardner nodded again. For Christ's sake, Bobbi, let's go. Bobbi nodded. Okay, be ready. Before he could answer her that symbol suddenly broke apart in curves, and Gardner realized, with a deep, almost sickening excitement, that the hatch was opening. There was a high, thin screaming sound, as if something rusted shut for a long time was now moving again, but with great resilience. He saw Bobbi turn the valve on the tank clipped to her belt. He did the same, then closed his eyes. A moment later, a soft wind pushed against his face, shoving his shaggy hair back from his brow. Gardner thought, death. That's death. Death rushing past me, filling this trench like chlorine gas. Every microbe on my skin is dying right now. His heart was pounding much too fast, and he had actually begun to wonder if the outrush of gas, like the rush of gas out of a coffin, his skittish mind chattered, wasn't killing him somehow after all. When he realized he had been holding his breath, he pushed a breath in through the mouthpiece. He waited to see if it would kill him. It didn't. It was a dry, stale taste, but it was perfectly breathable. 40, maybe 50 minutes of air. Slow down, guard. Take it slow. Make it last. No panting. He slowed down. Tried, at least. Then that high, screaming noise quit. The outrush of air grew softer against his face, and then stopped entirely. And Gardner spent entirety in the dark, facing the open hatch with his eyes shut. The only sounds were the muffled drum of his heart and the sigh of air through the tank's demand regulator. His mouth already tasted of rubber, and his teeth were locked much too hard on the rubber pins inside the snorkel mouthpiece. He forced himself to get cool and ease up. At last, eternity ended. Bobbi clear thought filled his mind. Okay. Should be okay. You can open those baby blues, guard. Like a kid at a surprise party. Tim Gardner did just that. 5. He was looking along a corridor. It was perfectly round except for a flat ledge of walkway halfway up one side. The position looked all wrong. For a wild moment, he visualized the Tommyknockers as grisly, intelligent flies crawling along the walkway with sticky feet. Then logic reasserted itself. The walkway was canted. Everything was canted, because the ship was at an angle. The soft light glowed out of the round, featureless walls. No dead batteries here, guard thought. These are real, long-life jobbies. He looked into the corridor beyond the hatch with a deep and profound sense of wonder. It is alive. Even after all these years, still alive. I'm going in, guard. Are you coming? Gonna try, Bobbi. She stepped in, ducked her head so as not to bump it on the upper curve of the hatch. Gardner hesitated a moment, biting down on the rubber pins inside the basket again, and followed. 6. There was a moment of transcendent agony. He felt rather than heard radio transmissions fill his head. Not just one. It was as if every radio broadcast in the world momentarily shrieked inside his brain. Then it was gone. Simply gone. He thought of the way that radio transmissions faded when you went into a tunnel. He had entered the ship, and all outside transmissions had been damped down to nothing. Nor was it only outside transmissions, he discovered a moment later. Bobbi was looking at him, obviously sending a thought. Are you all right? Was Gardner's best guess. But a guess was all it was. But he could no longer hear Bobbi in his head at all. Curious, he sent back. I'm fine, go on. Bobbi's questioning expression didn't change. She was much better at this than Gardner. She wasn't getting anything either. Guard gestured to her to go on. After a moment, she nodded and did. I gotta turn down the heat. Oh, you're fine. Knock it off. You eat, Harley? Yeah. All right. Belle, you can go ahead and let him out if he'll go out, but he's done eating in here, so. Well, they're fine now, so. Whew. Heaven. They walked 20 paces up the corridor. Bobbi moved with no hesitation. Nor did she hesitate when they came to a round interior hatch set inside the surface of the flat walkway on their left. This hatch, about 3 feet in diameter, was open. Without looking back at Gardner, Bobbi climbed into it. Gardner paused, looking back along the softly lit corridor. The hatchway to the outside was back there, a round porthole giving onto the darkness of the trench, and then he followed. There was a ladder bolted to the new corridor, which was almost small enough in diameter to be called a tunnel. Guard and Bobbi did not need the ladder. The ship's position had rendered the corridor almost horizontal. They went on their hands and knees, with the ladder sometimes scraping their backs. The ladder made Gardner uneasy. The rungs were spaced almost 4 feet apart. That was one thing. A man, even a very long-legged one, would have difficulty using it. The other thing about the rungs was more unsettling. A pronounced semicircle dip, almost a notch, in the center of each. So the Tommyknockers had really bad fallen arches, he thought, listening to the rasp of his own respirator. Big deal, guard. But the picture that came to him was not of flat feet or fallen arches. The picture which stole into his mind softly and yet with a simple, undeniable power, was of some not quite seen creature climbing that ladder. A creature with a single, thick claw on each foot. A claw which fit neatly into each of those dips as it climbed. Suddenly around dimly lit walls seemed to be pressing in on him. And he had to grapple with the terrible bout of claustrophobia. Tommyknockers were here, all right, and still alive. At any moment he might feel a thick, inhuman hand close about his ankle. Sweat ran into his eyes, stinging. He whipped his head around, looked back over his shoulder. Nothing, guard. Get yourself under control. But they were here, perhaps dead, but somehow alive just the same. And Bobbi, for one thing, but you have to see, guard. Now go. He started crawling again. He was leaving faint, sweaty handprints on the metal he saw. Human handprints along this thing which had come from God knew where. Inside this thing. Bobbi reached the mouth of the passage. climbed on her stomach, and dropped out of sight. Guard followed, stopping at the mouth of the passageway and looked out. Here was a large open space, hexagonal in shape, like a large chamber in a beehive. It was also canted at a crazy funhouse angle as a result of the crash. The walls glowed with soft, colorless light. A thick cable came out of a gasket on the floor. This split into half a dozen thinner cords, and each ended in a set of things which looked like headphones with bulging centers. Bobbi wasn't looking at these. She was looking into the corner. Gardner followed her gaze and felt his stomach gain weight. His head swam dizzily. His heart faltered. He had been gathered around their telepathic steering wheel, whatever the hell it was when the ship hit. Or whatever the hell it was when the ship hit. They had perhaps been trying to pull out of their dive to the very last. They hadn't worked. And here they were, 2 or 3 of them at least, slung on into a far corner. It was hard to tell what they looked like. They were too tangled together. The ship had hit, and they had been thrown to that end of the room. There they still lay. Interstellar car crash, Gardner thought thickly. Is that all there is, Alfie? Bobbi did not go toward those brown husks piled in the lowest angle of this strange bare room. She only stared, her hands clenching and unclenching. Gardner tried to understand what she was thinking and feeling and could not. He turned and carefully lowered himself over the edge of the passageway. He joined her, walked carefully on the canted floor. Bobbi looked at him with the strange new eyes. What do I look like to her, though, with those eyes? Through those new eyes, Gardner wondered, and then back toward the tangled remains in the corner. Her hands continued to open and snap closed. Gardner started toward them. Bobbi clenched at his arm. Gardner shook off her grip without even thinking. He had to look at them. He felt like a kid drawn toward an open grave, full of fear but compelled to go on anyway. He had to see. Gardner, who had grown up in southern Maine, crossed what he believed to be, for all its starkness, the control room of an interstellar spacecraft. The floor under his feet looked as smooth as glass, but his sneakers held their grip easily. He heard no sound but his own harsh breathing. He smelled only dusty haven air. He walked down the slanted floor to the bodies and looked at them. These are the Tommyknockers, he thought. Bobbi and the others aren't going to look exactly like them when they're done becoming. Maybe because of the environment, or maybe because the original physiological makeup of the, would you call it, target group, results in a slightly different look each time this happens. But there's a kissing cousin resemblance, all right. Maybe these aren't the originals. They're close enough, ugly fuckers. He felt awe, horror, and a revulsion that ran blood deep. Late last night and the night before, a wavering voice sang in his mind. Tommyknockers knocking at the door. At first he thought there were 5, but there were only 4. One was in 2 pieces. None of them looked as if he, she, it, had died easily or with any serenity. Their faces were ugly and long-snouted. Their eyes were filmed over with the whiteness of cataracts. Their lips were drawn back in uniform snarls. Their skins were scaly but transparent. He could see frozen muscles laid in crisscross patterns around jaws, temples, and necks. They had no teeth. Bobbi joined him. Guard saw awe on her face, but no revulsion. These are her gods now, and one is rarely, if ever, revolted by one's own gods, Gardner thought. These are her gods now, and why not? They made her what she is today. He pointed to each one of them in turn, deliberately, like an instructor. They were naked, and their wounds were clear. Interstellar car crash, yes. But he didn't believe there had been any mechanical failure. These weird, scaly bodies were slashed, scored with ragged cuts. One six-fingered hand was still wrapped around the haft of something that looked like a knife with a circular blade. Look at them, Bobbi, he thought. Even though he knew Bobbi couldn't read him in here, even if he opened up all the way. He pointed here to a grinning mouth buried in another creature's throat. There, to a wide wound gaping in a thick, inhuman chest. There, to a knife still clenched in one hand. Look at them, Bobbi. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to see they were fighting. Having a good old knockdown drag out here in the old control room. None of this come let us reason together shit for your gods. They're whipping some heavy numbers at each other. Maybe it started as an argument on whether or not to land here. Or maybe it was about whether or not they should have hooked a left at Alpha Centauri. Anyway, the results are the same. Remember how we always assumed a technologically advanced race of beings would be if one ever made contact with us? We thought they'd be smart like Mr. Wizard or wise like Bobby Young on Father Knows Best. Well, there's the truth, Bobbi. The ship crashed because they were having a fight. And where are the bastards? Or the blasters, the phasers, the transporter room? I see one knife. The rest they must have done with mirrors, or their bare hands, or those big claws. Bobbi looked away, frowning strenuously. A pupil who didn't want to learn the lesson. A pupil who, in fact, determined not to learn it. She started to move off. Gardner caught her by the arm and pulled her back, pointed at the feet. If Bruce Lee had had a foot like that, he would have killed 1,000 people a week, Bobbi. The Tommyknockers' legs were grotesquely long. They made Gardner think of those guys who done stints in Uncle Sam's suits and marched in 4th of July parades. The muscles below the semi-transparent skins were long, ropey, gray. The feet were narrow and not precisely toed. Instead, each foot sloped into one thick, chitinous claw, like a bird's talon, something like a giant vulture's. Gardner thought of the dips in the ladder's rungs. He shuddered. Look, Bobbi, see how dark the claws are? That's blood, or whatever they had inside them. It's on the claws because they did most of the damage. This place sure as shit didn't look like the bridge of a Starship Enterprise before it crashed. Just before it hit, it probably looked more like a free-for-all cockfight out behind some redneck's barn. This is progress, Bobbi. Next to these guys, had the power man look like Gandhi. Frowning, Bobbi pulled away. Leave me alone, her eyes said. Bobbi, can't you see? Bobbi turned away. She wasn't into seeing. Gardner stood by the desiccated bodies, watching her climb the deck like a woman climbing a steel, smooth hill. She didn't slip at all. She turned toward a far wall where there was another round opening and boosted herself in. For a moment, Gardner could see her legs and the dirty soles of her tennis shoes, and then she was gone. Gard walked up to the slope and stood for a moment near the center of the room, looking at the single, thick cord coming out of the floor, at the earphones that split off from it. Similarity to the setup in Bobbi's shed was perfectly clear. Otherwise, he looked around. Hexagonal room, barren, no chairs, no pictures of Niagara Falls or Cygnus D Falls, for that matter. No astrogation charts, no mad lab equipment. All the big-time science fiction producers and special effects men would have been disgusted by this emptiness, Gardner thought. Nothing but some earphones lying tangled on the floor, and the bodies perfectly preserved, but probably as light as aluminum leaves by now. Earphones and remains like husks piled in one far corner, where gravity had tossed them. Nothing very interesting about it, nothing very smart that fit, because the Havanites were doing lots of stuff, but none of it was very smart. When you got right down to where the short hairs grew, it wasn't disappointment he felt so much as stupid correctness, not rightness. God knew there was nothing right about this, not correctness, as if part of him had always known it would be this way when and if they got in. No Disneyland razzmatazz, only a dreary species of blankness. He found himself remembering W.H. Auden's poem about running away. Sooner or later, you always ended up in one room, under a naked light bulb, playing solitaire at 3 a.m. Tomorrowland, it seemed, ended up being an empty place, where people smart enough to capture the stars got mad and tore each other to shreds with the claws of on their feet. So much for Robert Heinlein, Guard thought, and followed Bobbi. 9. He trekked uphill, realized he had eternally lost track of what his position was in relation to the world outside. It was easier not to think about it. He used the ladder to help himself along as he went. He came to a rectangular porthole and looked through it into something that might have been an engine room. Big metal blocks, square on one end, rounded on the other, marched off in a double row. Pipes, thick and dull silver in color, protruded from square ends of these blocks and moved off at strange, crooked angles, like straight pipes coming out of a kid's jalopy, Bart thought. He became aware of liquid warmth on the skin above his mouth. It divided in two and ran down his chin. His nose was bleeding again, slowly, but as if it meant to keep it up for a while. Is the light brighter in here now? He stopped and looked around. Yes. And he could hear a faint humming. Or was that imagination? He cocked his head. No, not imagination, machinery. Something had started up. It didn't just start, and he knew it, and you know it. We started it up. We're kicking it over. He bit down hard on the mouthpiece. He wanted out of here. Wanted to get Bobbi out. The ship was alive. In a weird way, he supposed it was the ultimate Tommyknocker. It was a howl. It was also the most horrible thing of all. Sentient creature. What? Woke it up, of course. Guard wanted it asleep. All of a sudden he felt too much like Jack nosing around the castle while the giant slept. They had to get out. He began to crawl faster. Then a new thought struck him, stopping him dead. What if it won't let you out? He pushed the idea away and kept going. Oh, wow. 10. The corridor branched into a Y. Left arm continuing to angle up, the right turning steeply downward. He listened and heard Bobbi crawling to the left. He moved that way and came to another hatch. She was standing below it. She glanced briefly up at Guard with eyes that were wide and frightened. Then she looked back again. He got one leg over the lip of the hatch and paused. No way he was going in there. The room was lozenge-shaped. It was like oval. It was full of hammocks suspended in metal frames. There were hundreds of them. All were canted drunkenly upward and to the left. The room looked like a snapshot of a sailing ship's bunk room, taken just as the ship rolled in the trough of a swell. All the hammocks were full, their occupants strapped in, transparent skins, dog-like snouts, milky dead eyes. Cable ran from each scaled triangular head. Not just strapped, Gardner thought, chained. They were the ship's drive, weren't they, Bobbi? If this is the future, it's time to eat the gun. These are dead galley slaves. They were snarling, but Gardner saw that some of the snarls were half obliterated because some of their heads seemed to have exploded, as if when the ship crashed, there had been a gigantic backflow of energy that had literally blown their brains out. All dead, trapped forever in their hammocks, heads lolling, snouts frozen in eternal snarls, all dead in this tilted room. Close by, another engine started up, chopping rustily at first, and then smoothing out. A moment later, fans whirled into life. He supposed the newly started engine was driving them. Air blew against his face. Whether or not it was fresh was something he didn't intend to personally check out. Maybe opening the outer hatch started this stuff up. But I don't believe it. It was us. What starts up next, Bobbi? Suppose they started up next. Tommyknockers themselves? Suppose their grayish, transparent, six-fingered hands started to clench and unclench, as Bobbi's hands had been doing as she stared at the corpses in the barren control room. What if those taloned feet began to twitch? Or suppose those heads began to turn and those milky eyes looked at them. I want out. The ghosts here are very lively, and I want out. He touched Bobbi's shoulder. She jumped. Gardner glanced at his wrist, but there was no watch there. Only a fading white shape on his otherwise tanned wrist. It had been a Timex, a rough old baby that had gone on a lot of toots with him and came out alive. But 2 days of working on the excavation had killed it. There's one John Cameron Schwartz never tried in those old TV ads, he thought. Bobbi took the point. She pointed at the air bottle clipped to the belt and raised eyebrows at Gardner. How long has it been? Gardner didn't know and didn't care. He wanted out before the whole damn ship woke up and God knew what. He pointed back down the passageway. Long enough. Let's bug out. A thick, oily, chuckling noise began in the wall again next to Gardner. He shrank from it. Drops of blood from his slowly bleeding nose splattered the wall. His heart was beating madly. Stop it. It's just some sort of pump. The oily noise began to smooth out, and then something went wrong. There was a screech of grinding metal and a quick, thudding series of explosions. Gardner felt the wall vibrate, and for a moment the lights seemed to flicker and dim. Could we find a way out of here in the dark if the lights went out? You make the joke, I think, senor. The pump tried to start again. There was a long metallic scream that set Gardner's teeth biting into the rubber plugs of his mouthpiece. It died away at last. There was a long, loud rattle, like a straw in an empty glass. Then nothing. Not everything lasted all that time with no damage, Gardner thought, and found this idea actually relieving. Bobbi was pointing. Go, guard. Before he did, he saw Bobbi pause and look back once at the ranks of hammocked dead. That frightened look was back on her face. Then Guard was crawling back the way he came, trying to keep an even, steady pace as the claustrophobia wrapped itself around him. 11. In the control room, one of the walls had turned into a gigantic picture window, 50 feet long and 20 feet high. Gardner stood, gape-jawed, looking at the blue marine sky and a fringe of pines, spruces, and maples around the trench. In the lower right-hand corner, he could see the roof tree of their equipment lean-to. He stared at this for several seconds, long enough to see big white summer clouds drifting across the blue sky, before realizing it couldn't be a window. There were somewhere toward the middle of the ship, and deep in the ground as well. A window in that wall should show only more ship. Even if they had been near the hull, which they weren't, it would have given on a vista of mesh-covered rock wall, with maybe a squib of blue sky at the very top. A TV picture of some kind. Something like a TV picture, anyway. But there were no lines. The illusion was perfect. Forgetting, in this powerful new fascination, his claustrophobic need to get out, Gardner walked slowly toward the wall. The angle gave him a perverse sensation of flying. The effect was like slipping behind the controls of an airline trainer, and pulling the mock controls up into a steep climb. The sky was so bright he had to squint. He kept looking for the wall, the way you might expect to see a movie screen through the picture as you got closer to it. But the wall just didn't seem to be there. The pines were a true, clear green. Only the fact that he couldn't feel any breeze or smell the woods worked against the persuasive illusion. He walked closer, still looking for the wall. It's a camera. Gotta be. Mounted on the outer rim of the ship. Maybe even the part Bobbi stumbled over. The angle confirms that. But Jesus, it's so fucking real. The people at Kodak or Polaroid saw this. They'd go out of their gut. His arm was grabbed hard, and terror leapt up in him. He turned, expecting to see one of them, a grinning thing with a dog's head, holding a cable with a plug tip in one hand. Just bend down, Mr. Gardner. This won't hurt a bit. It was Bobbi. She pointed to the wall, held out her hands and arms, and jittered them rapidly in some kind of charade, then pointed at the window wall again. After a moment, Gardner got it. In a grisly way, it was almost funny. Bobbi had been miming electrocution, telling him that touching the window wall would probably be a lot like touching a third rail of a subway. Gardner nodded, and pointed toward the wider companionway through which they had entered. Bobbi nodded back and led the way. Gardner boosted himself up. He thought he heard a leaf dry rattle and turned back, feeling a child's dreamy terror tug at his mind. He felt that it must be them, those corpses in the corner, them, rising slowly to their taloned feet like zombies. But they still lay in their tangled drift of strange arms and legs. The wide, clear view of the sky and the trees on the wall, or through the wall, was dimming, losing reality and definition. Gardner turned away and crawled after Bobbi as fast as he could. So, long 7. You know what? We're going to read 7. The scoop continued. 1. You're crazy, you know, John Lorenzo told himself as he pulled into exactly the same parking slot Everett Hillman had used not 3 weeks ago. Leandro did not, of course, know this. This is probably just as well. You're crazy, he told himself again. You bled like a stuck pig. That's 2 teeth less in your head, and you're planning to go back there? You're crazy. Right, he thought, getting out of the old car. I'm 24, unmarried, getting bulgy around the middle, and if I'm crazy, it's because I found this. I did. Me. I tripped over it. It's big and it's mine. My story. No, use the other word. It's old-fashioned, but who gives a fuck? It's the right word. My scoop. I'm not going to let it kill me, but I'm going to ride it until it bucks me off. Lorenzo stood in the parking lot at the 1:15 on what was rapidly becoming the longest day of his life. It would also be the last, despite all his mental avowals to the contrary, and thought, good for you. Gonna ride it till it bucks you off. Probably Robert Capa, Ernie Pyle thought the same thing from time to time. Sensible, sarcastic, but sensible. That deeper part of his mind seemed to be beyond such sense, however. My story, it returned stubbornly. My scoop. John Leandro, now clad in a t-shirt wearing where the hell is Troy, Maine? David Bright would probably have laughed himself into a hemorrhage over that one. Crossed the small parking lot of the Maine Med Supplies, specializing in respiration supplies and respiration therapy since 1946, and went inside. 2. $30 is a stiff deposit for an air tank, don't you think? Leandro asked the clerk, thumbing through his cash. He guessed he had the 30, but it was going to leave him with about $1.50. Wouldn't think they'd be a big black market item. We never used to require one at all, the clerk said, but we still don't if we know the individual or the organization, you know. But I lost one 3 weeks ago. Old man came in, told me he wanted some air. I figured he meant for diving, you know. He was old, but he looked tough enough for it. So I started telling him about down east scuba dive and banger, and he said no. But he said no. He was interested in ground portability. So I rented it to him. I never got it back. Brand new, Bell flat pack. $200 piece of equipment. Leandro looked at the clerk, almost sick with excitement. He felt like a man following arrows deeper and deeper into the frightening but fabulous and totally unexplored cavern. He rented his mask? Personally? Well, it was a flat pack, actually, but yes. My dad and I run the place. He was delivering oxy bottles down to Augusta. I caught hell from him. I don't know if he'll like me renting another Bell, even, but the deposit, I guess it's okay. Can you describe the man? Mister, do you feel okay? You look a little white around the... I'm fine. Can you describe the man who rented the flat pack? Old, had a tan. He was mostly bald. He was skinny, stringy. I guess you'd say. Like I say, he looked tough, Clark thought. He was driving a Valiant. Did you check the day he rented the flat pack? Yo cop, reporter, Bangor Daily News. Leandro showed the clerk his press card. Now the clerk also began to look excited. He did something else besides rip off our flat pack. Could you look up the name and date for me? Sure. The clerk flipped back through his rental book. He found the entry and turned the book so Leandro could read it. The date was July 26th. The name was scrawled, still legible. Everett Hillman. You never reported the loss of the equipment to the police? Leandro said. It was not a question. If a complaint of theft had been lodged against the old geezer, to compliment his landlady's understandable unhappiness at being stiffed for 2 weeks' rent, the cops might have taken more interest in how or why Hillman had disappeared, or where he had disappeared to. No, Dad said not to bother. Our insurance doesn't cover the theft of rented equipment, see, and, well, that's why. The clerk shrugged and smiled, but the shrug was slightly embarrassed. Smile, slightly uneasy. And taken together, they told Leandro a lot. He might be a terminal twerp, as David Bright feared, but he was not a stupid one. If they had reported the theft or disappearance of the flat pack, the insurance company wouldn't cover the loss. But this fellow's father knew some other way they could stick it to the insurance company. But for now, all that was very much a secondary consideration. Well, thank you for all your help, Leandro said, turning the book back around. Now, if we could finish up here. Sure, of course. The clerk was obviously happy to leave the subject of insurance behind. And you won't put any of this in the paper until you check with my father, will you? Absolutely not, Leandro said, with a warm sincerity that P.T. Barnum himself would have admired. Now, if I could just sign the agreement. Right. I'll have to see some ID first, though. I didn't ask the old guy, and I also heard from Dad about that, I can tell you. I just showed you my press pass. I know, but maybe I ought to see some real identification. Sighing, Leandro pushed his driver's license across the counter. 3. Slow down, Johnny, David Bright said, but Leandro was standing at an outer phone kiosk near the edge of a drive-in restaurant parking lot. He heard the beginnings of excitement in Bright's voice. He believes me, son of a bitch. I think he finally believes me. Please take them out. As he had driven away from Main Med Supplies and back toward Haven, Leandro's excitement and tension had grown until he thought he might explode if he didn't talk to someone else. And he had to. He recognized that as a responsibility that superseded his desire to get his scoop alone. He had to because he was going back. Something could easily happen to him. It did. He wanted to be sure somebody knew what he was onto. And Bright, as insufferable as he could be, was at least utterly honest. He wouldn't double-cross him. Slow down, yeah, I got to. He switched the phone to his other ear. The afternoon sun was hot on his neck, but it didn't feel bad at all. He started with the ride to Haven, the incredible jam-up of stations on the radio, the violent nausea, the bloody nose, the lost teeth. He told him about his conversation with the old man at the general store, how empty the place had been, how the whole area could have been wearing a big sign that said, "Gone fishing." He didn't mention his mathematical insights because he could barely remember having them. Something had happened. But it was now all vague and diffuse in his mind. Instead, he told Bright that he had gotten the idea that the air in Haven had been poisoned somehow, that there had been a chemical spill or something, and maybe the escape of some natural but deadly gas from inside the earth. A gas that improves radio transmissions, Johnny? Yes, he knew it was unlikely. He knew all the pieces didn't fit yet. But he had been there, and he was sure it was the air that had made him sick. So he had decided to get some portable oxygen and go back. He related this coincidental discovery that Everett Hillman, whom Bright himself had dismissed as a nutty old man, had been there before him on exactly the same errand. So what do you think? Leandro said finally. There was a momentary lag, and then Bright said that Leandro believed to be the sweetest words he'd ever heard in his life. I think you were right all the time, Johnny. Something very weird is happening out there, and I advise you very strongly to stay away. Leandro closed his eyes for a moment and leaned his head against the side of the telephone. He was smiling. It was a large and blissful smile. Right all the time. Ah, they are good words, fine words, words of balm and beatitude. Beatitude. Right all the time. Johnny, are you still there? Eyes still closed, still smiling, Leandro said, I'm here. Just relishing it, David, old man, because I think I have been waiting my entire life for someone to tell me I was right all the time, about something, about anything. Stay away. Call the state cops. Would you? Fuck no, Leandro laughed. Well, there you go. I'll be okay. I've got oxygen. According to the guy at the medical supply place, Hillman did too. He's just as gone. I'm going, Leandro repeated. Whatever's going on in Haven, I'm going to be the first one to see it and get pictures of it. I don't like it. What time is it? Leandro's own watch had stopped, which was funny. He was almost sure he'd wound it when he got up that morning. Almost 2. Okay. I'll call him by 4, again at 6, etc. until I'm home and dry. If you or somebody there doesn't hear from me every 2 hours, call the cops. Johnny, you sound like a kid playing with matches telling his father if he catches on fire, Dad has permission to put him out. You're not my father, Leandro said sharply. Bright sighed. Look, Johnny, if it makes any difference, I'm sorry I called you fucking Jimmy Olsen. You were right. Isn't that enough? Stay out of Haven. 2 hours. I want 2 hours, David. I deserve 2 hours, God damn it. Leandro hung up the phone. He started back to his car, then turned and marched defiantly back to the walk-up window and ordered 2 cheeseburgers with everything on them. In It was the first time in his life he had ever ordered food from one of those places that his mother called roadside luncheonettes. Only, when she had said the word, she made such places sound like a blackest pits of horror, as in, it came from the roadside luncheonette or Earth versus the microbe monsters. When they came, the cheeseburgers were hot and wrapped in grease-spotted sheets of wax paper with the marvelous words Dairy Burger Ranch printed all over them. He had gobbled the first even before he got back to his Dodge. Wonderful, he said. The word muffled to something that sounded like wannel. Wonderful, wonderful. Microbes do your worst, he thought with almost drunken defiance as he pulled out onto Route 9. He was, of course, unaware that things were changing rapidly in Haven now, and had been ever since noon. The situation in Haven was, in nuclear parlance, critical. Haven had, in fact, become a separate country, and its borders were now policed. Not knowing this, Leandro drove on, tearing into his second cheeseburger and regretting only that he hadn't ordered a vanilla shake to go with them. 4. By the time he passed the Troy General Store, his euphoria had dissipated, and his former low nervousness had returned. The sky overhead was a clear blue, in which a few wispy white clouds floated, and his nerves felt as if there were a thunderstorm on the way. Hi! Right? I love cheeseburgers. So we are actually on the third section, which is the last section. And we are reading chapter 7. We have 3 more after this. So being that this is Thursday, we might get done with it by Saturday night. I'm not real sure though. I might have to do Sunday because it's like 47 sections. It's really big. So yeah, this is like everything that the whole book has built up to. So let's see what happens, shall we? Yes, can I help you? All right, all right. Not knowing this, Leandro drove on, tearing into his second cheeseburger and regretting only that he hadn't ordered a vanilla shake to go with them. My baby. He's been a good girl, huh? By the time he passed the Troy General Store, his euphoria had dissipated, and his former low nervousness had returned. The sky overhead was a clear blue, in which a few wispy white clouds floated, and his nerves felt as if there were a thunderstorm on the way. It's winter, no thunderstorms, but I wish. He glanced at the flat pack on the seat beside him. The gold cup covered with a round of cellophane, which read, "Annie sealed for your protection." In other words, Leandro thought, microbes, keep out. No cars on the road, no tractors in the fields. No boys walking barefoot along the side of the road with fishing rods. Troy dreamed silent, and Leandro guessed toothless under the August sun. He kept the radio tuned WZON, and as he passed the Baptist church, he began to lose the signal in the rising mutter of other voices. Not long after that, his cheeseburgers began to first walk around uneasily in his stomach, and then to jump up and down. Imagine cheeseburgers round, jumping up and down with arms and legs. He could imagine them squirting grease as they did so. He was very close to the place where he had pulled over on his first effort to get into Haven. He pulled over now without delay. He didn't want the symptoms to get any worse. These cheeseburgers had been too damned good to lose. I love thunderstorms. I miss the old thunderstorms that we used to get. They would last for hours, and all you would see is thunder, hear thunder and see lightning, and it was just awesome. I love your enthusiasm, by the way. 5. With the oxygen mask in place, the queasiness went away at once. The sense of low, gnawing nervousness did not. He caught a glimpse of himself, gold cap bobbing on his mouth and nose, in the rearview mirror, and felt a moment of fright. Is that him? The man's eyes looked too serious, too intent. They looked like the eyes of a jet fighter pilot. Probably looked like one too. Leandro didn't want people like David Bright to think he was a twerp, but he wasn't sure he wanted to look that serious. Well, I guess that explains a little hyperness, huh? Too late now. You're in it. The radio babbled in 100 voices, maybe 1,000. Leandro turned it off, and there up ahead was the Haven Town line. Leandro who knew nothing at all about invisible nylon stockings, drove up to the town line marker and then passed it into Haven with no trouble at all. Although the battery situation in Haven was approaching the critical point again, force fields could have been set up along most of the roads leading into town. But in the frightened confusion over the developing events of that morning, Dick, Allison, and Newt had made one decision that came directly affect John Leandro. They wanted Haven closed, but they didn't want anyone to strike an inexplicable barrier in the middle of what appeared to be thin air. Turn around and carry the tale back to the wrong people, which was everyone else on the earth just now. Oh, I wish we had a white Christmas. I miss the snow. Christmas and snow is the one thing that we should have had. Maybe a white New Year's. I don't believe anyone could get that close, Newt said. He and Dick were in Dick's pickup truck, part of the procession of cars and trucks racing out to Bobbi Anderson's place. I used to think so too, Dick replied, but that was before Hillman and Bobbi's sister. No, someone could get in, but if they do, they'll never get out again. All right, fine. You're queen for a day. Now, you can't drive this fucker any faster. The texture of both men's thoughts, of the thoughts all around them, was dismayed and furious. At that moment, the possible incursion of outsiders into Haven seemed the least of their worries. I knew we should have gotten rid of that goddamn drunk, Dick cried out aloud and slammed his fist down on the dashboard. He was wearing no makeup today. His skin, as well as becoming increasingly transparent, had begun to roughen. The center of his face, and Newt's face, and the faces of all of those who had spent time in Bobbi's shed, had begun to swell, to grow decidedly snout-like. Oh yes, I drink a lot of water. We actually keep a thing of water in our fridge. It's a water purifier. 6. John Leandro, of course, knew nothing of this. He knew only that the air around him was poisonous, more poisonous than even he would have believed. He had slipped the golden cup down long enough to take a single shallow breath, and the world had immediately begun to fade into dimness. He put the cap back quickly, heart racing, hands cold. For some reason, now I'm going to cough. Some 200 yards past the town line marker, his Dodge simply died. Most Haven cars and trucks had been customized in such a way as to make them immune to the steadily increasing electromagnetic field thrown off by the ship and the Earth over the last 2 months or so. You know, I'm really trying to get better. Instead, the cough wants to hold on. The tiredness wants to hold on. Never get the flu, it sucks. Thrown off by the ship and the Earth over the last 2 months or so. Much of this work was done by Elt Barker's shell, But Leandro's car had undergone no such treatment. no such treatment. Excuse me. I'm almost done reading. Yeah. He sat behind the wheel a moment, staring stupidly down at the red idiot lights. He threw the transmission into park and turned the key. The motor didn't crank. Hell, the solenoid didn't even click. Battery cable came off, maybe. It wasn't the battery cable. If it had been, the oil and amp lights wouldn't be glowing. But that was minor. Mostly he knew it wasn't his battery cable, just because he knew it. There were 3 trees along both sides of the road here. The sun, through their moving leaves, made dabbled patterns on the asphalt and white dirt of the soft shoulders. Leandro suddenly felt that eyes were looking out at him from behind trees. This was silly, of course, but the idea was nonetheless more powerful. Okay, now you have got to get out and see if you can walk out of the poison belt before your air runs out. The odds get longer every second you sit here giving yourself the creeps. He tried the ignition key once more. Still nothing. He got his camera, took the strap over his shoulder, and got out. He stood looking uneasily at the woods on the right side of the road. He thought he heard something behind him, a shuffling sound, and whirled quickly, lips pulled up in a dry grin of fear. Nothing. Nothing he could see. The woods were lovely, dark, and deep, yet moving. You're just standing here, using up your air. He opened the door again, leaned in, and got the gun out of the glove compartment. He loaded it, then tried to put it in his right front pocket. It was too big. He was afraid it would fall out and go off if he left it there. He pulled up his new t-shirt, stuck it in his belt, and pulled the shirt down over it. He looked at the woods again, then bitterly at the car. He could take pictures, he supposed. But what would they show? Nothing but a deserted country road. You could see those all over the state. Even at the height of the summer tourist season, the pictures wouldn't convey the lack of wood sounds. The pictures would not show that the air had been poisoned. There goes your scoop, Johnny. Oh, you'll write plenty of stories about it. And I've got a feeling you'll be telling a lot of network news filming crews which is your good side, but your picture on the cover of Newsweek, Pulitzer Prize, forget it. Part of him, a more adult part, insisted that was dumb, that half a loaf was better than none, and most of the reporters in the world would kill to get a slice from this loaf, whatever it turned out to be. But John Leandro was a man younger than his 24 years. When David Bright believed he had a generous helping of twerp in Leandro, he's seen a generous helping of twerp in Leandro, he hadn't been wrong. There were reasons, of course, but the reasons didn't change the fact. He felt like a rookie who gets a fat pitch during his first at-bat in the majors and hits an opposite field triple. Not bad. But in his heart, a voice cries out, "Hey, God, if you was gonna give me a fat one, why didn't you let me get it all?" Haven Village was less than a mile away. He could walk it in 15 minutes, but then he would never get out of the poison belt before the air in the flat pack ran out, and he knew it. If only I'd rented 2 of these goddamn things. Even if you'd thought of it, you didn't have the cash enough to pay the friggin' security deposit on 2. The question is, Johnny, you want to die for your scoop or not? He didn't. If his picture was going to be on the cover of Newsweek, he didn't want there to be a black border around it. He began to trudge back toward the Troy town line. He only got 5 dozen steps before realizing he could hear engines, a lot of them very faint. Something going on over on the other side of town. Might as well be something happening on the dark side of the moon. Forget it. With another uneasy glance in the woods, he started walking again. Got another dozen steps and realized he could hear another sound. a low, approaching hum from behind him. He turned. His jaw dropped. In Haven, most of July had been Municipal Gadget Month. As the becoming progressed, most Havenites had lost interest in such things, but the gadgets were still there. Strange white elephants, such as the ones Gardner had seen in Bobby's shed. Many had been pressed into service as border guards. Hazel McCready sat in her town hall office before a bank of earphones, monitoring each briefly in turn. She was furious at being left behind to do this duty while the future of everything hung in the balance out at Bobby's farm. But now, someone had to enter town after all. Glad of the diversion, Hazel moved to take care of the intruder. 7. Hey, excuse you. I'm reading. Don't start. Thank you. It was a Coke machine, which had been in front of Cooter's Market. It was the Coke machine. Leandro stood frozen in amazement, watching it approach. A jolly red and white rectangle 6.5 feet high and 4 wide. It was slicing rapid through the air toward him, its bottom about 18 inches over the road. I've fallen into an ad, Leandro thought. Some kind of weird ad. In a second or two, the door of that thing will open and O.J. Simpson is going to come flying out. It was a funny idea. Leandro started to laugh. Even as he was laughing, it occurred to him that here was the picture. Oh, God, here was the picture. Here was a Coca-Cola vending machine floating up a rural stretch of 2-lane blacktop. He grabbed for the Nikon, the Coke machine humming to itself, banked around Leandro's stalled car and came on. It looked like a madman's hallucination, but the front of the machine proclaimed that, however much one might want to believe the contrary, this was the real thing. Still giggling, Leandro realized it wasn't stopping. It was, in fact, speeding up. And what was a soda machine really? A refrigerator with ads on it? And refrigerators were heavy. The Coke machine, a red and white guided missile, slid through the air at Leandro. The wind made a tiny, hollow hooting noise in the coin return. Leandro forgot the picture. He leapt to the left. The Coke machine struck his right shin and broke it. For a moment, his leg was nothing but a bolt of pure white pain. Excuse me. He screamed into the gold cup as he landed on his stomach at the side of the road, tearing his shirt open. The Nikon flew to the end of its strap and hit the gravelly, soft shoulder with a crunch. Oh, you son of a bitch, that camera cost $400. That's a lot for a camera. Excuse me. He got to his knees and turned around, shirt tore open, chest bleeding, legs screaming. The Coke machine banked back. It hung in the air for a moment, its front turning back and forth in small arcs that reminded Leandro of the sweeps of a radar dish. The sun flashed off its glass door. Leandro could see bottles of Coke and Fanta inside. Suddenly, it pointed at him and accelerated toward him. Found me, Christ. He got up and tried to hop toward his car on his left foot. The soda machine bore down on him. Coin returned, hooting dismally. Shrieking, Leandro threw himself forward and rolled. The Coke machine missed him by perhaps 4 inches. He landed in the road. Pain bellowed up his broken leg. Leandro screamed. The machine turned, paused, found him, and started back again. Leandro groped for the pistol in his belt and brought it out. He fired 4 times, balanced on his knees. Each bullet went home. The third shattered the machine's glass door. The last thing Leandro saw before the machine, which weighed just a bit over 600 pounds, hit him, was various soft drinks foaming and dripping from the broken necks of the bottles his bullets had shattered. Broken bottlenecks coming at him at 40 miles an hour. Mama! Leandro's mind shrieked, and he threw his arms up in front of his face in a crisscross. He didn't have to worry about jagged bottlenecks after all, or the microbes, which might have been in the cheeseburgers from the burger ranch, for that matter. One of life's greatest truths is this: when one is about to be struck by a speeding 600-pound Coke machine, one need worry about nothing else. There was a thudding, crunching sound. The front of Leandro's skull shattered like a Ming vase, hurled onto the floor. A split second later, his spine snapped. For a moment, the machine carried him along, plastered to it like a very large bug plastered to the windshield of a fast-moving car. His splayed legs dragged on the road, the white line unreeling between them. The heels of his loafers eroded to smoking rubber nodules. One fell off. Then he slid down the front of the vending machine and flopped onto the road. The Coke machine started back toward Haven Village. Its coin holder had been jarred when the machine hit Leandro, and as it moved rapidly through the air, humming, a steady stream of quarters, nickels, and dimes spewed out of the coin return and went rolling about on the road. So, we're going to stop there because obviously my cough is not going to let me continue. So, with that, let's see. This, yeah, actually, we might get through it in 2 or 3 readings, so that would be nice, wouldn't it? It'd be really nice. So we'll see how things go. Like I said, I do apologize for this morning. I had to go into town and do some shopping. Tomorrow I should be able to read in the morning. Shiver. If I'm not here, I will read in the afternoon, because I do have to go into town. Again, tomorrow, I got to prepare for this weekend. We are having our pork roast, sauerkraut, potatoes, which I found is a German tradition, or an Irish one. And then we're going to make cookies on Saturday. We're going to have chocolate chip and sugar cookies, so it's going to be fun. I will read in the morning Saturday. I don't know about the evening. It kind of depends, but I know I'm not going to start cookies in the morning. Excuse you. I'm talking. Hey, excuse me. Yoo-hoo. Hey. That down. Sit down. You have a big mouth. No, not if you're going to bark. Thank you. 19 months old and a big mouth. I said not if you're going to bark. No. Go. 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 Thank you. Anyway. Hopefully you guys have a good night. I am going to head out. I am going to get her outside, get Mama outside to go potty, and relax the rest of the evening. So I will talk to you guys later. I love y'all. Follow me if you haven't, and keep up. And like I said, let me know, even through whispers, if you guys want, what you guys want to read next, and I'll see if I have it. So yeah, we're going to continue reading. I, of course, will not be reading on Sunday. Maybe in the morning, but not the evening. The evening I'm definitely going to spend with the family. And then I'm probably going to sleep in on Monday because it's the new year. But I probably will be reading in the evening. So it's not like Christmas. Anyway, if I don't see you guys tomorrow morning, I will see you in the evening. All right? I love y'all. Bye.